Michael, you have a great note that kind of goes through all the states and the shortfalls that they're facing, and ultimately thinks legalizing, gambling and other types of things are going to be one way of raising money. But that wouldn't do anything really to close these gaps. I mean, these are enormous gaps.
Yeah, and that helps on the margins, but we're expecting that through fiscal 2021, states cumulatively are going to fall short of their revenue projections about $180 billion. If they drain the reserves, if they flatten out spending, they can maybe get that number down to $60 billion, but they do have other options. They can borrow from the Fed's municipal liquidity facility, which has about $250 billion available, so they can kind of spread that pain out over time. But still, you've got some tough choices that need to be made this year or down the road if Congress doesn't come in with another appropriation.
One thing that I thought was a little bit hopeful as a resident of New Jersey is you think that even though New Jersey and Illinois face much bigger budget holes, they could weather this somewhat better than a state like Texas, because New Jersey, Illinois, they have a lot of professionals who can work from home, still generate economic activity, whereas Texas, even unlike 08-09, they're facing a crash in the energy industry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a couple of important differences here. So at least the economic trajectory we're basing this number on is a sharper downturn, but it's shorter. The S&P 500 hasn't fallen as much, so you shouldn't get as much of a downdraft versus the global financial crisis and capital gains. And unemployment benefits are more generous because of the last CARES Act, and that's taxable in most places. And states tax online retail sales. They didn't do that before. So those are some of the ways that the revenue drop isn't as severe. But of course, that still means you're going to have to make some tough choices, drain some reserves, and austerity is part of this. And as we know, 75% of the state and local government component of the GDP is basically just public employee compensation. So there'll also be a drag on the broader economy if there isn't another appropriation.
So in other words, the message from your analysis is that even if there's a ton of stimulus on the federal level, there's actually going to be a lot of state and local austerity, which is felt by those workers primarily, but has ripple effects as well. I wonder what you thought of Mitch McConnell floating the idea that states themselves perhaps should be able to file for bankruptcy.
Yeah, we comment on that, and we told muni investors in particular were worried about this, and our thought was that this wasn't a proposal that you should get too worried about. One, we think that it will require a law getting through Congress. We don't think the Democrats in the House of Representatives are particularly amenable to that when they're talking about increasing aid by hundreds of billions of dollars. And then there's actually a constitutional question as to whether or not states can actually declare bankruptcy, because it means giving up their sovereignty to a federal bankruptcy court. So I didn't view that as something investors should get too bothered about.
Fair enough. So that brings us back to how the states are likely to try to make up these shortfalls. What other options do they have? I mean, even roughly speaking, what do you think in terms of online gambling? I don't know if we've already kind of seen the legalization wave for cannabis, if there's other sources of revenue they could turn to, and if that would even make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, those things are on the table. Obviously, generic tax increases are also on the table. I think different states will choose different paths, but I think using some reserves, flattening out spending year over year takes care of a decent chunk of the problem. Maybe using the Fed's liquidity facility helps you spread pain over a couple of years with the intent that a stronger economic growth pattern over the next couple of years will replace some of that revenue. So, I mean, so the good news is that the state budget pain, which is really acute right now, you can spread out, and it alleviates a lot of the immediate credit concerns in a place like the muni market. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the states aren't functionally in a worse position today than they were before all this started.
Oh, for sure. And, some of them it was bad enough already. I guess my final question then, from what you're describing, by being able to smooth things out, use the Fed's liquidity facility, I mean, do they really need then a big rescue package from Congress on top of the funds that they've already received? If it sounds like they could find ways between that liquidity and revenue or spending smoothing, I guess, of getting through this on their own.
Yeah, well, it's basically two different choices. It's either you smooth out economic pain over time, or you attempt to alleviate the economic pain or sort of keep it from happening. So if the federal government wanted to appropriate $100 billion to the states right now, we think this would largely fill the austerity hole, which is different than the Fed saying you can spread that out over a couple of years. So it's just a choice between two different styles of approaching the budget stress.
All right. We'll see which they and many choose. Michael, thanks very much.
Thank you.